Good afternoon, everybody. Bill Cullina. I'm the Executive Director here at the Morris Arboretum. And today I thought I'd shoot a video on preparing a garden bed for planting. Behind me, this beautiful crabapple, Chinese crabapple. But we've got a lot of turf here around the farmhouse where I live, and I wanted to dig up some of that turf and prepare it for a vegetable garden or a flower garden, whatever you want to do. So I'm going to show you a little bit about teach you about composts and mulches and go through the process with you. So come on along, let's get started. Well, here's an area in my side yard that a couple days ago, ran the rototiller over to make the sort of first pass at chopping up the turf that was here, the turf and the weeds. Now, if you do have access to a rototiller, not everybody does, but it is an efficient way to remove turf, but one caveat is you have to do it several times to completely eliminate the turf and the weeds. If you just do it once, you'll get a lot of it resprouting. So what I do is I will till and let it sit like I'm doing now for 5 to 7 days, and then I'll till again. If I've got some really stubborn areas, I will then let it sit another week or so and then till a third time. So you do have to plan ahead when you're doing this. You can start doing it as soon as the ground can be worked in the spring to till, to start on killing the material that's there. Now, if you don't have access to a rototiller, you can certainly slice with a shovel, just slice under the turf and remove it like you're cutting sod. You can also do something called solarization, where you take black plastic and lay it over the area, cover it over with rocks, or weight it down with rocks, and let it sit in the sun for 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks, and that will completely kill everything underneath there. Another method that works fairly well, if you don't have to amend the soil prior to planting, is to just take sheets of newspaper and lay them overlapping down in an area. You have to do it obviously on a non-windy day. In fact, if you have a newspaper publisher near you, sometimes you can go and ask them where they get it printed and get the end rolls of the newspaper that they can't run through the presses. I've done that before, so you get these big rolls, which are easy. But anyway, lay the newspaper down 4 or 5 sheets thick, and then put some mulch over top of it to weight it down, and that will do a pretty good job of killing all but the most stubborn weeds. You let it sit for a period of weeks, and you can actually plant down through the newspaper and replant that way. Now, this soil is not too bad. It doesn't have a huge amount of organic material in it, I can see just by looking at it, but it's what I would call a silt loam, or a sandy silt loam. Certainly a good garden soil. You can tell you have clay if you rub the soil together when it's wet and it's sort of sticky and slides on your hands. Anything that's got more sand is going to feel gritty to the touch. So a good base to get started with, but I think because of the color and just looking at it, I'm going to add some compost to this mix, to this soil before I get started, so we'll show that to you next. Just to contrast, I thought I'd show you the soil in the vegetable garden. This has had regular additions of compost to it for years, and you can just see the darker color of this soil. Beautiful. It looks like it came out of a bag, and that's the benefit of adding organic material to your soil over years. Now, you can overdo it with organic material, but in this case, this soil is really just about right and perfect for planting my spring vegetables. I just moved down the slope toward the Wissahickon a little bit just to show you a little bit of a heavier soil. This is really more of a silt with some clay in there. Hopefully you can see the shininess of it, and yet when I
smear it on my fingers like that, I can just feel the clay. It's very slippery. There's no grittiness to it. So there's quite a bit of clay in this material. Now, the nice thing about adding organic material to the soil is it will make a sandier soil hold more water. It'll make clay soil more arable, basically, open it up. So adding organic material to the soil really helps any kind of soil that you're dealing with.
I'm standing here by this beautiful pile of compost that we had delivered for us. This is a dump truck load, about 15 yards or so of compost. And you can see, I'll do a little close-up of this in a minute, but you can see this just looks like black dirt. So that's what I would consider cold compost or finished compost. This is material, organic material that has gone through a decomposition process to the point where most of the easily available food for the microorganisms that break this down has been utilized, and so it's reached a point of stasis. And this kind of compost is ideally what you want to use when you're doing soil amendment, where you're actually working in organic material into the soil. I much prefer compost like this to other organic materials such as peat moss, which isn't exactly a sustainable product, things like that. Now, all compost is not created equal. The finished product is a byproduct of the inputs that go into it. So this compost is a mix of plant materials with some animal manures to give it a little bit of a higher nutrient content. So you can get compost that's basically all plant-based stuff like leaf compost and the like. You can also get compost that's really composted manure. So in general, the more manure in there, the higher the nutrient value of that compost is, and you have to be a little careful not to overdo it when you put that on. But one question that I get a lot from people is, well, how much do I need? And the answer is that I like to buy compost in bulk if I can get it. It's a lot cheaper than buying it by the bag. And also, when you have it in the bag, plastic tends to not allow good air exchange, and the compost actually suffocates. You have to remember that this material is full of life, full of living organisms that will build the biological community of your soil. And if you have it in a bag, the chances of those suffocating and getting kind of unwanted organisms in there is higher. So if you can get it delivered bulk if possible, there's lots of suppliers that can do that for you. They usually deliver it by the yard, and typically there's a minimum delivery, depending on the size of their trucks and that sort of thing. But a small delivery truck can deliver 5 to 7, 8 yards. A larger truck up to about 15. You can even get really big dump trucks of 30 yards or more. But in general, if you figure this as a rule of thumb, 1 cubic yard of material will cover 100 square feet, so a 10 by 10 area with 3 inches of material. So that's an easy rule of thumb. And if I'm going to be amending a new area like we're working on now, 3 inches, 2 or 3 inches of compost spread over the top and then worked into the soil is just about right. So that area that I have is roughly about 250 square feet, so it's 2.5 yards of compost should do it. So hopefully up close you can see a little bit better what this finished or cold compost looks like. Basically it looks like just black dirt. There's a few pieces of recognizable organic material in here, but generally all that's been broken down. You don't see bits of leaves or stems or wood chips or anything like that. So that's a good sign that you have finished compost. Now you probably heard the term mulch before. Mulch is a horticultural term for something that covers the soil. So it's different than the soil itself in properties, but it does some very important things, especially the proper kinds of mulch. One, it cools the soil in the summertime and keeps the soil from freezing so extensively in the wintertime. It lowers the amount of water evaporating off of the soil during the summertime, so helps keep water in the soil. It smothers weeds. If you watch my weed video, you talk a lot about how especially annual weeds have little seeds that need light to germinate, so if you cover them over, you can really limit the number of weeds you have. It's attractive if done well. And then a good mulch actually also feeds the soil, feeds the biological community of the soil. And to do that, it has to be an organic mulch. I'm really not a huge fan of these sort of plastic weed blankets, stone mulches, that sort of thing. I really like organic mulch because you're helping to build that biological community. Now, this material here is just simply ground up leaves that we raked up in the fall, ran over with the mower a few times, and then piled here to use on some of the woodland gardens in the springtime. Now, it's obviously it's free, and ideally, if you can just leave your leaves in place, don't rake them up, or if you want to rake them up and make them look a little nicer, you can chop them up like this and respread them. But leaves are there. They'll return to the soil and feed the soil and feed the plants too. But these are basically uncomposted, somewhat broken down leaves. One problem with this, and we'll sort of pan over and look, is that the weeds don't necessarily get killed when you just pile leaves like this. And so these are all tree seedlings, I think Zelkova seedlings, that are germinating in these leaves. So you are going to get some weeds, especially larger weeds, that light response is not so important, that'll be in uncomposted mulch material like this. Now the next kind of mulch I want to talk about are hardwood chips or hardwood mulch. This is probably familiar if you ever had trees taken down. You see those wood chippers. The arborists will chop up the branches and trees to make them easier to dispose. And you can get this as a very inexpensive mulch. We use a lot of this at the Arboretum, specifically on woody plants, especially trees, larger shrubs. It's a good mulch for them, for established woody plants. It's not a great mulch for flowers, bedding plants, perennials, vegetables, that sort of thing. But when you get this, you want to have it age for at least a year before using that. The piles that you see in the front here are newly dumped. You can see the different dump loads coming in. The pile in the back has been sitting there for a year, and then the pile that I'll show you in just a second over here is a little bit older. The reason you want to let it age is there are chemicals in the wood that can leach out if it's fresh and can damage other plants. Also, that wood provides a lot of food for the microorganisms to feed on, but doesn't provide much nitrogen in there for them to use to grow. And so if you put this wood material down in your soil, those microorganisms tend to tie up a lot of nitrogen. And if you remember, nitrogen is the most important plant nutrient, and so you'll often see nitrogen deficiency on plants if you put too much of this down. So letting it compost for a year or two is good. Now you can get this material fairly inexpensively delivered, and if you have a place where you can let it just sit for a while, that's better. But you can also, if you're going to buy this in, it's not too expensive, ask for hardwood chips that have been aged for at least a year, ideally even more than that. Now I just took a handful of that material from the pile here, and hopefully you can see it in the video, but it looks like it's been knitted together with cobwebs. Hopefully you can see that. Those are what you could think of as the roots of fungi, of mushrooms.
And if you've ever seen a mushroom farm, one of the things that they use to grow mushrooms are wood chips. Mushrooms love fresh wood chips. And this is one of the reasons that this kind of mulch is great for woody plants, because you may have heard the term mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae, or mycorrhizal association, is the association between the roots of a plant and a fungus, a particular fungus, that the tree gives it carbohydrates from photosynthesis, and the fungus gives the plant nutrients that it extracts from this decaying organic material. So the interesting thing is many woody plants associate with a type of mycorrhizal fungi that loves breaking down woody material, not surprisingly, things that fall off of the trees. These often will grow up, these typically will grow up to be the kind of mushrooms that you recognize as being a mushroom. Other types of plants associated with mycorrhizae are very, very different. But this tree mycorrhizae loves this kind of material, and so when you put this woody material down, although what you're getting is not a lot of nitrogen in this material, as the fungi break this down, you're getting all that released by the action of the fungus. So you're feeding, in a sense, the mycorrhizal fungi that then feed the tree. And they can actually suppress weeds, they can suppress disease organisms, that sort of thing. And this is really why this kind of material works great for woody plants. So I've come over to the older pile. This is a pile of hardwood chips that's been sitting for, this will be the second season at least. I'll throw some of the fresh stuff on top so you can see the difference in color. So the old material still looks like wood chips, but it's partially broken down, and it does have some fully composted material mixed in there. This is the stage when we'd spread it around our trees and shrubs, putting down 1 inch or 2 of this compost, of this hardwood chips around the tree, but being careful not to pile it up against the trunk of the tree or some of those big structural roots that come out as the tree flares. Why is he showing me this pile? Well, this is an interesting part of the Arboretum most people don't get to see. This is, we have an agreement with the township to, they bring all their yard waste that people will leave out for curbside pickup. They bring it here, and we turn this into compost. So this is the raw material, and you can see the bags and that sort of thing. This is just what's coming in from spring cleanup. One thing that I'll ask you, if you do use curbside pickup for your organic material, please don't wrap your twigs with non-biodegradable twine. Please don't put plastic bags in there or anything like that, because that just obviously ends up in the compost. And if you're going to use twine, use something that is really like a sisal twine or something that will break down. And please don't use plastic bags and that kind of thing. But if I pan away from this pile over to here, you can see the finished product. This is twice ground, somewhat composted material that's been generated from all the yard waste and fall leaves and even Christmas trees that came here over the fall and winter last year. And this is the machine that does it here. This is a tub grinder, and everything goes into that hopper and just gets chipped up and spit up that conveyor belt, and what you're left with is ground up material. This is the double ground yard waste, and I think you can see in the video there's a little bit more obvious organic material, pieces of twigs and chips and that sort of thing in here than that cold compost or finished compost that I showed you earlier. And I'll show you the difference between cold and hot compost. If I can dig down to this pile, hopefully you can see it. You can see that steam coming out. I can't put my hand in there. It's probably about 140
150 degrees. And that's basically billions of microorganisms sweating away in there, breaking this material down. So when you talk about hot compost, what I refer to as still actively biodegrading compost material. This is not such a good material to add as a soil amendment because it's still working on breaking down, but it's a fantastic mulch because you have enough uncomposted material in there to basically provide that blanket to smother weeds and that sort of thing, but enough digestion's going on that the nutrient content, the available nutrients in this is a lot higher than in those wood chips. So it works on trees, it works on shrubs, it works on perennials, flowers. I probably wouldn't use this in a vegetable garden, but that'd be about the only thing. The key with this type of material is it has to get to the point where it really is cooking to bring the temperature up like that. When you, if you buy compost or semi-composted material like this is what I would consider leaf compost. If it hasn't been brought up to temperature, that is, gotten up above 130 degrees or so for a period of time, the longer the better really, but ideally at least 3-4 days, it hasn't pasteurized. And so pasteurization is what is killing the weeds, it's killing disease organisms that are bad for you, that are bad for the plants, and that make it good material to use. If you don't let it pasteurize, then you don't get that effect. And the reason that we're able to do this here is because we have such big piles that they have such a mass to them that they will that they'll heat it very well. Now, the other key thing with good compost is that the beneficial organisms that are breaking this down need oxygen. And the reason this pile is so hot now is they just ran it right through that tub grinder again. They've aerated it, and so now there's lots of oxygen in there, and it's heated up and it's going crazy again. So if this material, we try to turn this, 3 or 4 times to aerate it and let it keep breaking down so that we get a nice even pasteurization, nice even decomposition, and make a good material. Okay, so I just spread about 2 yards or probably over a ton of this compost on the area here. You can see I've got roughly 2 inches, more or less 2 to 3 inches spread out of the whole area. Now let's go get the rototiller and till this up again. Okay, let's go. You can see I've changed my clothes because I'm working in the dirt, but so I've tilled in that compost and the cat approves. The soil looks a lot darker, looks a lot better. To be honest, I probably need to till this one more time after another week or so, let some of the weeds grow. But just to show you the final step, I've got a load of the leaf compost I was showing you earlier, and I'll dump it out. And that's another alternative that you can do. Is you can just put a heavy layer of this mulch on. That should kill most of the weeds that are trying to recover and come back up too if you can't get to it right away. In the situation we're in right now, with the quarantine we're under, I can't exactly get plants, so this area is going to have to sit for the foreseeable future until I can get some plants to plant it. But I hope this was a useful video for you. Thanks for stopping by to our virtual classroom here at the Morris Arboretum, and keep on gardening.